Hey, it's good to have you with us today. Thanks for joining us. I'm Greg Iverson, pastor of senior adults at Brook Church. We're in a Bible study on the book of Job from the Old Testament right now. We're working our way through the book of Job because, more than any other book of the Bible, in the entire Bible, Job deals with human suffering, with the issue of human suffering. And I don't have to tell you, what with all that is going on in our world right now, that there is just a whole lot of human suffering these days. That suffering can take on many different forms, of course, and it affects each of us in many different ways, but it does touch all of us in at least some way. You know, when it comes to suffering, the issue of human suffering, we can categorize it, generalize it, intellectualize it, rationalize it, editorialize it, politicize it, and criticize it. But the deal is that no matter how you analyze it, there's absolutely no question that we are living right now in some very tumultuous and turbulent times, aren't we? Job, friends, the book of Job, I really do believe is the ideal book for us to be studying right now in the summer of 2020. So again, I'm glad you can be with us. I really am. By the way, if you want to see any of our previous lessons on Job or the study guides that go along with them, you can find them on our Facebook page, EBC-Encompass. The dash is important, EBC-Encompass, or through our weekly emails. Let us know if you want to join our Facebook group or be on our email list. But for today, folks, we've gotten to the point in our study where Job's three friends, who all come by to visit him after he had lost everything, his wealth, his health, his family, those three friends, after spending a week in silence commiserating with Job, those three friends now try to help their friend Job by sharing with him their words of advice. Now, whether that advice is always the best advice is clearly debatable. What they say to their friend Job is often, in my opinion anyway, simplistic or naive or insensitive or argumentative or platitudinous. You can look that one up. Or maybe all of the above, but I guess the one thing that you can say is that they are trying to be helpful. And so they take turns. Each of these three friends, Eliphaz the Temanite, Bildad the Shuhite, and Zophar the Naamathite, they take turns giving long, uninterrupted speeches of what they at least think are words of wisdom. They share their words of advice. The first to speak, we looked at this last week, was Eliphaz the Temanite, probably because he was the oldest, and therefore back then, at least, also considered, because he was the oldest, to be the wisest. The next friend to speak is Bildad the Shuhite. I'm just going to call him Bildad this morning. Maybe his close friends, I don't know, maybe they called him Bill. Didn't know him that well. So I'll call him Bildad, but according to the pecking order of the time, Bildad was probably the second oldest of Job's three friends, and therefore probably considered to be the second wisest. Now, you may have already read Bildad's words in the 8th chapter of Job and in preparation for today. And you know, if you did, that's great. That's really good. I'm glad you did. But I'd still like for you to read his words again, if you will, out loud, just so you can hear how they sound to you before I make any comments on them myself. And so if you know how to pause this video long enough to read the 8th chapter, please do it at the count of 3. Okay, 1, 2, 3, see ya. All right, guys, the very first thing you noticed, what I sure hope you noticed, is that good old Bildad here does not waste any time getting straight to the point. As the second oldest, and probably, therefore, like I said, only the second wisest man of the three, he doesn't take the time to ease into his speech like Eliphaz did last week. asking Job if it's okay to speak to him, or complimenting Job on how he himself has helped so many people in the past. No, Bildad basically starts out full speed ahead, full throttle ahead. Check out the second verse. After first asking Job just how long he will say such things being Job's review of just how miserable he is, and wondering out loud what he did to deserve everything that's happened to him, and then praying to God for some sort of explanation, Bildad now ironically says here in the 8th chapter, the 2nd verse, that Job's words are nothing more than a blustering wind. Now, I say ironically because if anyone blusters here, friends, it sure seems to me as if it's Bildad himself. Truth is, he shows very little tact here in these first few words to his friend Job, and even less compassion. You might wonder, in fact, just exactly why Job even considered Bildad to be a friend, as brusque and as harsh as Bildad is with Job. About the only thing you can say about Bildad, I'm thinking, is that he does get right to the point. It's obvious already, isn't it, when you look at Bildad's words, that Bildad is never going to be miscongeniality. Does God pervert justice, he asks in verse 3? Does the Almighty ever pervert what is right? What Bildad is really asking here, friends, since the Hebrew word for pervert here really means to twist, what Bildad is asking Job here in a kind of a rhetorical way, but also a somewhat accusatory kind of way. Listen, guys, is whether God ever twists or distorts or manipulates justice to suit his own purposes. And of course, the only possible answer to that rhetorical question, as far as Bildad is concerned, is of course not. God doesn't do that. God doesn't operate that way, Bildad is saying. No, on the contrary, God is supremely just or perfectly just in all situations. God simply does not and will not ever pervert justice in any way. And so what that obviously means, as it applies to Job, is that if Job is suffering for some reason, as Job certainly is now suffering for some reason, then that reason must be because he deserves it. There is no other possible explanation as far as Bildad is concerned. Good people don't suffer. Why? Because God won't allow it. Bad people do suffer because God does allow it, or maybe even causes it. Accordingly, if you are suffering, listen, friends, this is what Bildad thinks. This is how he thinks. If you are suffering, you must be a bad person, or at the very least, you must have done a bad thing to continue that reason. If you're really suffering, as Job clearly is, then you must have done something really, really bad. As a matter of fact, says Bildad, in what must be one of the cruelest and most tactless statements in the whole Bible, Job, that's why your 10 children all died at once. God was punishing them for their sin. You may remember, if you were with us for our very first lesson about a month ago, that Job was so concerned about whether his children sinned at the parties they had that he got up early the next morning and offered sacrifices for all of them. So unless you want to believe that God will punish a father for the sins of his children by killing off all 10 of his children at once, Bildad here may be talking not so much about justice as he is about vengeance. And if that's the case, it may be the first and only time in the Bible where it's not the sins of the father visited upon the children, whatever you may believe about that, but instead the sins of the children visited upon the father. So like I say, miscongeniality, Bildad is not. But Bildad isn't done. You know, friends, whenever you're in a hole, what they say, the first thing you need to do is, what they say is when you're in a hole, the first thing you need to do is to stop digging. But Bildad just keeps digging and digging and digging. He gets deeper and deeper all the time. He goes on to say, Bildad does, he says, Job, if you will seek earnestly and plead with the Almighty, and if, Job, you are pure and upright, even now he, God, will rouse himself or move himself on your behalf and restore you to your prosperous state. In fact, Bildad goes on to say, your beginnings, Job, will seem so humble, so prosperous will your future be. Guys, painful as it is, let's go over those words just one more time, verses 5 through 7. Bildad says that God will treat Job well from this time on and even better than he has in the past if Job will just seek God earnestly and plead with him, and if Job is truly pure and upright. But you know, that if, as far as Bildad is concerned, is a big if. You see in Hebrew, in the Hebrew language, that if is what you might call a kind of an impossible if. In other words, what Bildad is really saying to Job, listen, friends, here, this is really important. What he's saying is if you will do these things, but of course you probably won't, or you can't, because your sins are just too great. And to tell you the truth, Job, you're not nearly as pure or upright as you think you are. It's like I say, it's an impossible if. What Bildad is really saying in these verses, friends, is if you look at them carefully, is that your life would be better, Job, if you would do these things, but I really doubt, I very much doubt that you will be able to do them, or even can do them. Of course, Bildad doesn't know that God himself, as we read in the very first chapter, considered Job to be blameless and upright. And so the deal is here, all along the line, that Bildad simply underestimates the basic goodness of his friend Job. And so all he does is continue to dig deeper and deeper and to waste perfectly good oxygen by speaking in cliches. Just suck it up, Job. Just work harder at it. Just pray harder. And you know, if you do that, everything is going to be all right. Everything's going to be better even than it was before. You ain't seen nothing. All of which presumes, friends, that nothing lastingly bad happens to good people, and nothing lastingly good ever happens to bad people. Life is a kind of cut and dried system of rewards and punishments, chutes and ladders, and it all happens in this life. I used to play that game when I was a kid, chutes and ladders. It was fun. Played it with my younger sister, played it with my parents, and I guess it was good in the sense that it taught or it tried to teach kids how to be good kids and not to be bad kids. But you know what that game also teaches when you really think about it? It teaches that real rewards and real punishments in life are often just as random as a roll of the dice. Good things and bad things happen sometimes for no reason, sometimes for no apparent reason. The assumption Bildad makes, the false assumption he makes, is that good things happen only to good people and bad things happen only to bad people. Verses 8 through 19 tell us more about Bildad and how he thinks. Everything I've said, he says to Job, is what every generation before us has learned. Papyrus, he says, that the marshy reeds that they used to make paper back then. Papyrus withers and dies without water, just like people will perish without God. Spider webs will give way, just like people disintegrate without God. Uprooted plants will shrivel up and blow away, just like we all do without God. If you're connected to God, all will go well, says Bildad. If you're not connected to God, or as connected to God as you should be, well, then good luck to you. Turn that around, and if you find that your life is not so smooth right now, well, it must be, it pretty much has to be, that you did something wrong, even if you don't know what it was, to deserve your fate. That's how Bildad thinks. Look quickly at verses 20 through 22, where Bildad tries, at least, to end on a positive note. If Job is as blameless as he says he is, says Bildad, and of course, as far as Bildad is concerned, that's a very big if. If Job is really blameless, then God will not reject him, just as God will not ultimately reward those who do evil. And Job, he says lamely, will still someday laugh and enjoy life while all his enemies will be shamed and basically obliterated. In other words, all is not lost, Job. Things will turn around for you, Job. Just you see. Friends, the problem with Bildad's outlook on life, listen, the problem is that it just does not square with reality. The deal with Bildad is that he wants to believe exactly what we all want to believe. And that's that good people will be rewarded and bad people will be punished. That's the way we want our world to be, isn't it? But when we open our eyes and when we see things how they really are, we know deep down that our world does not always operate that way, don't we? In fact, the truth is, whether we like it or not, that sometimes the good suffer, and all too often the bad prosper. And the thing is that while the good sometimes try to help the bad sometimes will take advantage of that. They'll take what the good have to offer and then turn around and kick the good people in the teeth. Here's the deal, friends. If you expect that everything will be fair in this life, just in this life at all times, you will need to prepare for a lot of disappointment. It's not right. But in this sinful world, in this broken world, that is the way it is. Bildad just doesn't see it that way. What he sees is that the good will always be rewarded and the bad will always be punished. And that just does not square with reality. All right, before we move on with Job's response, how about you take another few minutes to just look at Job's words in chapters 9 and 10. Put me on pause while you read chapters 9 and 10, please. Read quickly, please. Don't keep me waiting. And then bring me back when you're ready to continue. Ready? 1, 2, 3. Don't you wish you could pause everybody like that? You know, folks, Job's response to Bildad is kind of long. 3 times as long, as a matter of fact, as Bildad's speech. And in fact, Job does repeat himself quite a bit here and there. And so what I really want to do here is to break down his speech, Job's speech, into 6 sections. I'm going to go quickly here, so you're going to have to fasten your seatbelt. 1 speech, 6 sections. The first section of Job's speech, chapter 9, verses 1 through 13, is where Job talks about the undeniable sovereignty of God, his dominion, or his authority, or his dominance over everything and everyone. God, to put it simply, Job tells us, is in charge, absolutely and entirely in charge. Human governments may work out different kinds of arrangements where there'll be a king or maybe a dictator or maybe a majority might rule, but the creator of the universe is ultimately in charge of his creation. Before him, before God, we are mere mortals, you and I. We might not agree with God. My goodness, we may not even acknowledge God sometimes. But at the end of the day, says Job, there is no way for us ever to dispute God. We have no recourse, you and I. We could not answer God, if my math is correct, even 0.1% of the time as far as Job is concerned here. His wisdom is profound, says Job, of God. His power is vast. You know, the Middle East, where Job lived, was, and actually it still is, of course, an earthquake zone. There are lots of earthquakes there because that's where 3 continents in the Middle East, in that area, Israel, all that area, the Middle East, the Holy Land, we call the Holy Land, there are 3 continents come together: Africa, Europe, and Asia. And as such, it is, as those continents gradually collide with one another, it is definitely an earthquake zone. No one lives there for a lifetime without seeing mountains literally moved or even overturned sometimes, and the level ground shaken. And it's God, of course, who does all that, says Job. The sun only shines when God allows it to shine, says Job. The stars come out at night only if God says they can. All of creation, the earth and the heavens and the seas and the constellations and the night skies, everything is of God's own making. His marvels cannot be understood or tallied up. He's there, but he can't be seen. He cannot be stopped. He cannot be questioned or second guessed, even when it makes absolutely no sense to us. If God's angry, he'll stay angry for as long as he wants to be angry. God, in other words, is entirely omnipotent, fully and completely in charge of absolutely everything. Even the mythical sea monster Rahab and his helpers are subject to God. God truly is undeniably sovereign. In the next section of Job's speech, the second section, verses 14 through 20, Job reaches the painful conclusion that if God is then in charge, then clearly he, Job, is not. In fact, in a sense, Job doesn't even know how to approach God. Oh, he can pray. He can always pray, but God's greatness as creator and Job's smallness as a tiny little piece of creation is not exactly what you might call direct access. If Job or anyone disagrees with God, as audacious as that may seem, what can you do about it? How can you state your case against God? That's what Job wants to know. It's as if Job is in a courtroom contending against God, where God himself is judge, jury, and executioner all rolled into one. Even if he's innocent, as Job certainly feels that he is, he cannot argue effectively with God, but only ask for mercy. He may contest against God, but he feels like he'll never get a fair hearing. In fact, his situation would only get worse if he got that fair hearing. God is infinitely stronger than Job. Plus, he's supremely just. So on what grounds can you even think about opposing him? He might be innocent, Job might be, but his words would undoubtedly convict him. He might be blameless, but still found guilty. In short, because God is God and Job is not, Job really has no case before God. God is completely, totally, entirely, fully, and absolutely in charge. In the third section of Job's speech, verses 21 through 24, Job goes on about how far away and basically how indifferent God sometimes seems to him. The thing is, as far as Job is concerned, is that God not only destroys both the blameless and the wicked, but it seems like he doesn't even care. Not to Job anyway, as he mocks, Job says. God mocks the despair of the innocent. And whenever a nation falls into the hands of the wicked, it's as if God doesn't even care about it. God does nothing about it. And if God doesn't do anything about it, then who will? Or who even can? Maybe it's the pain talking. And we know what that's like, don't we? We know what it's like to hurt and to say things that we may not really mean. But Job here, who's in a lot of pain, he right now cannot see how God seems at all close to him, or how God would even care for him. The fourth section of Job's speech, his reply to Bildad, verses 25 through 31, is a reflection on just how very short life seems to Job, and how, from his point of view, how nice guys always seem to finish last. My days are swifter than a runner, he says, and the way he sees it, they fly away without a glimpse of joy. Time passes like boats made out of papyrus, the reeds that they used back then to make paper, blown across the surface of the water, or as fast as an eagle snatching its victim in the sky. I can, says Job, I can smile and I can put my best foot forward, but it really doesn't change very much. Not really. No matter what I do or how I do it, God is still going to find me guilty. And so what's the point? Why should I even try? I can clean up. I can wash my face and I can put on fresh clothes, but I'll probably still end up on this pile of garbage. What's the use? Life is short, and it doesn't always pay off to be nice. Section 5 of Job's speech, his reply to Bildad, verses 32 through chapter 10, verse 1, is all about how it practically is hopeless to try to work out any sort of deal with God. He, God, is not a mere mortal like me that I might answer him, that we might confront each other in court, says Job. In other words, the playing field here is not level as far as Job's concerned. There's just no way that he can ever measure up. If only there were someone to mediate between us, he says. Someone to bring us together, someone to remove God's rod from me so that his terror would not frighten me anymore. Then I would speak up without fear of him. But as it stands now, I cannot. It's all hopeless as far as Job is concerned. Ladies and gentlemen, can we just take a little time out here? I don't know what you see when you read these words, the last 3 verses, verses 33 through 35 of the 9th chapter, but I'll tell you what I see. I see a big flashing neon sign here with just one word or just one name on it. And that name is Jesus. I know we're talking about a book of the Old Testament here, where Jesus does not appear, at least not by name. And as the oldest book in the Old Testament, written as long as a couple of thousand years before Jesus lived, almost as long before Jesus lived as we have now lived after Jesus lived. Job, like all Hebrews back then, like all Jews of all time, lived with an expectation of a Messiah. But of course, that was long before there was any possibility of Job ever personally knowing the Messiah. So all he could do back then when he lived was to wish for or to long for, or maybe to pray for somebody who might be a mediator between him and God, somebody who might actually bring God and him together, somebody who might make amends for his sins, whatever they were, somebody to take on his punishment, somebody to take away his fear, somebody to make things right between him and God. In other words, somebody he didn't know and couldn't know back when he lived, but somebody that we, living on this side of the cross as we do, can know, and I trust do know. Friends, we have that mediator that Job wanted. We have that somebody, you and I, who can and does bring God and us together. That's somebody who can and who does make amends for our sins, whatever they are and however many of them there are. That's somebody who could and who actually did take on our punishment when he willingly went to the cross for you and me. That's somebody who can and who does take away all of our fears about everything, including death. That's somebody who in every way makes things right between God and ourselves. Folks, I can't help it. I really can't. But when I read Job's words here in these verses about how he yearned and how he desired that somebody would come and help him in the midst of his despair and his misery, but at that time, at the time in which he lived, there was no one. I see a bright flashing sign turned on for you and me that says again and again, Jesus, Jesus, Jesus. Sorry, I went from teaching to preaching there. I still got to get through the rest of the 10th chapter. The 6th and last section of Job's speech, his long reply to Bildad, is basically another one of his long prayers to God. Clearly, Job now shifts his attention from Bildad from his friend Bildad to God. Oh, he still complains, he still moans, he still states his case. But Job realizes now that it makes absolutely no sense for him to keep on arguing back and forth with Bildad, and that's because Bildad can't do a thing about Job's situation other than to offer his advice, which is not even always the best advice. No, it's time Job realizes now for him to turn his attention back to God. Basically, what Job wants to know, friends, even though he's not sure that he will ever get an answer, what he wants to know is if God has any idea about how Job is now suffering. And if he does, if God does, then would he please let Job in on it, because Job's in the dark. He doesn't know. He doesn't understand. Job doesn't. He doesn't seem to how it seems to please God in some way to oppress him or to spurn him. How God may even smile on the plans of the wicked. He doesn't get it. Job doesn't. How God can first shape him from the earth. He can create Job and then turn around and destroy him. It makes no sense to him how God can bring Job forth from his mother's womb just to then watch him die. God, he wants to know, do you know what you're doing to me? Do you care what you're doing to me? Do you care about me? But friends, see once more, that while Job doesn't understand the ways of God, while he doesn't see, while he just doesn't get it, he still never, ever curses God. Because God, he realizes, whether Job understands it or not, Job realizes that God is the giver of life and ultimately in control. And I don't know about you, but what I take from these verses is that there is something kind of strangely comforting to know that a man or a woman can argue with God and rail against God and maybe even accuse God without ever once denying God. I don't know about you, but there's something that inspires me to know that a person can actually have all kinds of questions and maybe even some doubts about God and about the ways of God and still not lose his or her faith in God. I'm telling you, folks, and this may just be one of the major lessons of the entire book of Job. I'm telling you that there is something hopeful and encouraging for us to know that God can take whatever it is that we dish out, just like Job did, and even more, which should then allow us to go to God in any and every situation. We don't have to fully understand God in order to go to God, because he is the giver of life and the one truly and ultimately in control. Now, I skipped over a lot of stuff this morning just to get this all in. You may want to go back over these chapters again. But friends, what I want you to see, a bottom line for today, if you will, is that we don't always have to understand everything about God and everything about the ways of God to continue to believe in God. As a matter of fact, sometimes the more we know about God and the ways of God, the more head knowledge we have about God. I can certainly attest to this. That actually gets in the way sometimes of knowing God as your own personal Father, forever friend, as your Creator and your Redeemer and your eternal Sustainer. I was blessed, truly blessed, to go to a very good university, and then after that to an excellent seminary, one of the best seminaries in the country. And in those 7 years, I really did learn a whole lot about God and about the ways of God. I was very, very blessed. But I will tell you that it took me a lot longer. So long, as a matter of fact, that I am still learning. It's taken me a lot longer to know that God does love me and cares for me. And in Jesus Christ, he even died for me. Not just so that this life makes more sense, but so that I can live forever with him. truth is, friends, you can learn about God and about the ways of God in just a few years if you apply yourself. But to have a life-giving relationship with God, that can take a lifetime. You don't have to know everything about God to believe in God. One thing that you can say about Job is that while he didn't always know what he wanted to know about God, he never stopped believing in God. Not once. Dear Father in heaven, would you please help me to learn from Job that my faith in you does not have to depend upon my understanding of you? Would you help me to learn that though I can go through the various phases of my life, including difficult times like this present time, that I can do that without ever denying that you are fully in control of what happens, whether or not I understand all that happens. And would you please help me to learn, God, how to listen when a friend gives me advice, but also when to turn to you for the answers that only you can give. Life is hard sometimes, Lord. You know that. You know that through your own Son. But no matter how hard it is, please keep me connected to you as my only Savior. All this I pray in his name. Amen. Thanks for being with us today. I'll look forward to seeing you next week. God bless everyone.